Topic of our presentation is guidelines for human AI interaction. Recent advances in AI have created a requirement to write a brand new set of guidelines for designing the face of AI-based applications. AI's unpredictable behavior makes general guidelines of user interface unfit for the AI-based applications. Even the research over the years have proven the fact that the deciding guidelines of user interface makes the AI-based applications unreliable for the users. The authors through this work have generalized over 150 AI-related design recommendations into 18 design guidelines. Here are the set of 18 guidelines which are generalized by the authors for human AI interaction design. There are many research works focused on analyzing the behavior of AI-based application, which can further simplify the guidelines for designing a better UI for AI-based applications. Here is one of such related work where authors have summarized the guidelines published by the major companies where AI-based applications are developed. The remaining of the paper discuss about different phases where the 18 guidelines are tested and validated further.
Phase 1 basically consists of gathering the guidelines, and they stem from three sources: internal and external companies, public articles and editorials about AI design, and other relevant scholarly papers. And what they did was group them into themes. They generated a list of 168 potential guidelines. The refinement steps basically was gathering these ideas into related concepts using affinity diagram processing and other clustering techniques. This created 35 AI design related concepts. They eliminated the vague, something that was too specific to an AI scenario. This created a list of 20. Out of those 20, you could categorize any one of them into 4 top level titles: initially, during interaction, when wrong, and over time. In phase 2, 11 members selected AI infused products such as email products, navigation system, e-commerce website, photo organization products, image search services, something of that nature. And over an hour period, they applied modified heuristics, and by that means some basic rules for each guidelines to follow. And if they didn't follow them, those issues and ambiguities and conflicting interpretations were reviewed, and they made modifications to the list. There were also some opportunities to remove guidelines that really didn't have any place there. But in the end, they followed 3 criteria that are in the slides right here. And the last one, removing conjunctions, also meant splitting up some guidelines. So in the end, phase 2 produced a set of 18 guidelines, which were further revised in phase 3.
Phase 3, based on the modified heuristic evaluation study from phase 2, the estimated time to complete the user study would take an hour. To understand the guideline applicability across the variety of products and to get feedback about the guideline clarity, the research has conducted a user study with 49 human-computer interaction practitioners. The procedures are: moderate the user study. After heuristic evaluation, assign each participant to an AI-driven feature of a product. Then help participants to become familiar with a guideline by providing document at least one application and one violation for each guideline. Then fill out a form asking a series of questions for each guideline. The form asks participants to first determine if the guideline does not apply or to their assigned feature, which are irrelevant or out of scope, and if not, to explain why. After completing the evaluation, participants submitted their example and rating and filled out in a final questionnaire. One objective of the study was to determine if and how each of the design guidelines manifests in a variety of AI-infused products. A maximum variance sampling strategy was used to select popular AI-infused products that covered a wide range of scenarios. Among 13 lists of search results, top 10 products were selected in each and filtered out any that were offensive, game-related, or did not currently use AI to drive any of their main end-user-facing services. Then grouped the remaining products by their primary use case that resulted in 10 categories. Example, email, e-commerce, social networking. Finally, selected the prominent AI-driven feature to evaluate per product. In total, 20 products selected, 2 of which were from Microsoft. Adjustments and avoid of misinterpretations were taken to obtain accurate counts of examples of the proposed guideline across products. The study has reviewed a participant response.
The evaluation of the results focused on 2 key questions. First, are the guidelines relevant? To determine if a guideline was relevant, there were 4 indicators. First, the total number of applications and violations. Second, guidelines with a much greater number of applications than violations. Third, guidelines with a much greater number of violations than applications. And fourth, guidelines with a high number of does not apply. The second question they used to evaluate the guidelines was, are the guidelines clear? The 18 guidelines were rated by the participants. They determined that some guidelines needed further clarifications if errors were systematic. This occurred if they were confused 4 or more times with other guidelines or multiple participants said it wasn't clear. The guidelines identified in this phase as unclear were examined further in the next section, Phase 4, Expert Evaluation of Revisions. Expert revisions are very effective in identifying wording and clarity problems. The review team was made up of 11 experts. These experts consisted of UX designers and researchers. In reviewing the revisions to the guidelines, they chose the version they thought was the most clear. They also rated whether the guidelines were easy to distinguish between or not. The experts preferred the revisions overall.
So next we're going to cover future work, which includes examining the value of guidelines at various stages of design, also the development of additional guidelines for specific instances like AS systems that lack a graphical UI, like your voice-based assistants, and certain high-risk areas like autonomous driving vehicles. And further research into the guidelines and how well these guidelines are applied by designers, the trade-offs due to the general nature of the guidelines, and more complex systems, as well as the ethical side of the guidelines and how well those apply. So in conclusion, we covered a brief introduction, which covered the issue that the paper addresses, which is the AI's potential to violate usability guidelines of traditional UI design. We also covered phase 1, which discussed the compiling of the guidelines, which is a really unrefined list from several research resources. Next, we went over phase 2, which was the refinement of that unrefined list into a list of 18 guidelines. That followed a prescribed set of 3 criteria. Next, we went on to phase 3 and discussed the actual user study and how it was carried out, as well as the adjustments of any invalidated results from that user study. We also discussed the results of the case study, which determined the relevance of each guideline, and phase 4, which was an even further refinement using a panel, in a sense, of UI and ACI experts. And then we also discussed future work performed that could be performed as recommended by the author of the paper. Thank you.